Okay, so let me just introduce you to the big players in the lymphatic system. You can see most of them here. So there's the fluid, and when it's in the lymph vessels, it's actually called lymph. I'll talk about it in just a second. Then there are the actual structures, the actual organs and tubes. There are the lymph vessels. We'll get to those in just a second. The lymph nodes that you can see here in a bunch of different regions. And then four organs. The tonsils. Tonsils are lymphatic tissue. The spleen. We talked a little bit about what the spleen does when we did hepatic portal system. Talk more about it today. And then the thymus. And your thymus is right here on the surface of your heart. It's really small in adults, so you may have never noticed it before, and you probably wouldn't see it on our cadavers. So that's the thymus. It is a site for immune system maturation, and it actually makes some hormones that are important in the immune system maturing. And then last thing is the thing that's probably hardest to understand. I'm going to explain it to you once, and then when we get to it, I'll do it in more detail. It's called mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, MALT. What it really is at your mucous membranes, your moist membranes that are at least theoretically open to the outside of the body. Think respiratory, digestive, urogenital. Just behind the epithelial tissue of the respiratory, digestive, and urogenital systems, you have a whole bunch of lymphatic tissue that can respond to a potential pathogen. Because let's just think about that. Respiratory, digestive, and urogenital tissues are potentially open to the outside of the body, and so it's a really, really likely place to meet a pathogen. So what do? So if this was the surface of my digestive tract, this is, of course, going to be a site, like the lumen. This is the lumen right here, where, of course, I'm going to do nutrient absorption, but I also might absorb pathogens. So just deep to that is going to be some B cells, T cells, macrophages, some things that would notice and launch an immune system response if you met a pathogen. So that's MALT, and I'll talk about it again in just a second. Okay, so let's meet lymph first. What is lymph? Well, lymph is going to be the fluid that is inside these vessels, and it would be slowly percolating up all the way back to your vessels, specifically your subclavian veins. So when it's in a tissue, it's just called interstitial fluid when it's like in any tissue. But once it enters the lymphatic system or the lymph vessels, it's called lymph. Okay. What it really is really like extracellular fluid, kind of like blood plasma, but with less protein, because blood plasma has all kinds of proteins in it. And it doesn't have any red blood cells or platelets in it, but it does have white blood cells, leukocytes in it. Okay. And so it's definitely got white blood cells, no red blood cells to speak of, and no platelets to speak of, and very little protein, except for like antibodies or proteins. Okay, so that's what lymph is. And lymph is slowly making its way back up here for two reasons. Both we're returning that leaked fluid back to the cardiovascular system, and we are also potentially launching an immune system response as we go through like a lymph node. So eventually, whatever happened in that immune system response will get dumped back into my bloodstream. So now let's meet the vessels, the lymph vessels. So you know what blood capillaries look like, right? Here's the arterial end of a capillary bed, and here's the venous end of a capillary bed. And of course, if this is a systemic capillary bed, it's going to be high oxygen on this side and low oxygen on that side. So what happens with the lymphatic capillaries is that those are kind of wound together with the blood capillaries, but they're not circulating. They begin as like a little blind end tube. Like notice this one's just the blind end with open spaces that are really, really likely to pick things up. So they exist pretty much everywhere except bone marrow, bone, teeth. They're really similar to a blood capillary made of simple squamous epithelium, But the epithelial cells, endothelial cells are not tightly joined together. They've got big open spaces in them. So they really pick up everything, including big proteins, including bacteria, pathogens, all kinds of stuff. They will get picked up into there. So, and then there are some special lymphatic capillaries that exist in the lining of the intestine that do that thing that I just talked about. So this is a lymphatic capillary. This is a special lymphatic capillary that exists. So this would be the small intestine. Okay, small intestine is of course going to do boatloads of absorption of nutrients. Everything that is not a lipid will go into the blood capillaries, but the ones, this little guy that's poking up right here into the villi, that is called a lacteal. And that is the thing that will actually absorb fats. So that's called a lacteal. They absorb digested fats. Interesting thing about that. That means that after you eat a fatty meal, like a Thanksgiving meal, right after that, if you assessed your lymph, it would be like opaque and milky because it had so many fats in it. Okay, now let's go bigger than the capillaries. So these are microscopic, just like blood capillaries are microscopic. It's just that they're blind end and they're open, okay? They're really, really likely to pick stuff up. So those you won't see with the naked eye. But then what will you see with the naked eye? You'll see these, which are called lymph vessels or lymphatic vessels. And so as the capillaries unite, they get bigger and bigger, and eventually they're visible with the naked eye. And you form these lymphatic vessels. And lymphatic vessels resemble like a vein in structure, but if we look at them more closely, they have even thinner walls, and they have way more one-way valves than even a vein does. Here's what a one-way valve looks like in these. So they have way more one-way valves. And then that's because they're lower pressure. And so you are really going to have to prevent backflow in these very, very low pressure vessels. So they are going to lead up toward the subclavian veins. All of these are going that direction. And then they are going to pass through lymph nodes or multiple lymph nodes on their way. They are generally going to follow the path of most vessels back toward the heart. They're not dumping into the heart, though. They're dumping into the subclavian veins. Ultimately, all of your lymphatic vessels are going to converge to dump into two big channels, and each of these channels will dump into a subclavian vein. But the drainage pattern is so strange. So all of these are going to come together to dump into two that are in the chest. So we have one of them that is called, this guy right here, this is called the thoracic duct, and it dumps into the left subclavian vein right before the internal jugular vein dumps in. And then this guy right here, which is called the right lymphatic duct, that little guy dumps into the same place on the right side. So why are these such different sizes? Because the drainage pattern for these two, and notice again, all of the lymphatic vessels that we looked at before are going to drain into one of those two things. So the thoracic duct, this big honker right here, also called the left lymphatic duct, it's going to gather up lymphatic vessels from a whole bunch of different places. It ends up draining basically all of the body below the chest, and then the left side of the head, chest, and arm as well. So the thoracic duct begins about L1. At L2 level, it begins at this weird looking little structure called the cisterna chyli right here. And then it's draining everything up into the left subclavian vein. And so look at what it drains. All of this area in the light green yellowish color, that's all drained into the thoracic duct right there, okay? And then the right lymphatic duct is just this little bitty guy here, right here, that drains most of the rest of the body. Do you see that? The right lymphatic duct is drained here. So the right lymphatic duct drains lymph from the upper right quadrant of the body only. Really weird circulation pattern. I think we can all agree that that's pretty strange circulation pattern right there. And okay, so then all of those are going to dump into the subclavian vein. So what they would have done is they would have pulled fluid from the tissues, like all the way down at your feet and all the way down at your hands, all different kinds of locations. That fluid would have slowly but surely percolated up through these lymphatic vessels and through the lymph nodes, looking for antigens and pathogens the whole time. Then it would have dumped into the thoracic duct, which would dump over here, or the right lymphatic duct, which would dump over there. And so the thoracic duct drains pretty much all of this left side, and the right lymphatic duct drains just this part over here. Okay, now let's start looking at lymphatic structures. So when we're not in the vessels, but we're actually in like the lymph organs, what are we going to see? So when we get into the lymphatic organs, what we're going to see is almost everywhere you look, you're going to start to see this little pattern. Do you see right here? I'll show you. Okay. So this structure right here that you are seeing is called a lymphatic nodule. Okay. This is one too. And this is another one. Okay. When you look at a lymphatic nodule, what that is going to be is a collection of white blood cells in a certain little orientation that kind of repeats itself all over the lymphatic system. So what it is going to do is it is going to look for and respond to foreign antigens, to germs and the flags on germs. Lymphatic nodules are small, but they often group in areas so that they can team up on things. And at the center of each one, in the middle, let me show you where it is. Okay, in the middle, this light portion in the middle right here, that pale center is where the B cells and the macrophages are active. B cells, remember, are really the specific attackers that will make antibodies, which are kind of the missiles in the story. And then macrophages are like the big bruisers that just attack anything that looks weird. And then in the outer portion of every lymphatic nodule, outer portion that's darker here, that's where the generals are. That's where the T cells are. So notice that you will see the same repeating pattern here. Outer portion is darker. That's where the generals are. Inner portion is lighter. Bruisers and specific attackers. Okay. And so you end up seeing sort of this same pattern wherever you go in lymphatic tissue. So let's start putting lymphatic tissue in a few locations. Okay, so I want to talk about MALT. MALT is always hard for people to get into their head, but let me remind you what we're talking about. So MALT is mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. What it is those little lymphatic nodules that I just described with the T cells around the outside, right? And the B cells and macrophages in the middle. Take one of those nodules and put it just under the epithelial tissue of your guts. That's a good place to put it, right? Because you might meet pathogens right there. Or put it just under the epithelial tissue in your respiratory tract, okay? But don't just put one of them, put a whole collection of them, okay? So that they can gang up on whatever pathogen they run into, okay? So you are going to see, this is MALT right here. This is specifically MALT with the small intestine. Okay, that's MALT. It's found under epithelial tissues in mucous membranes, hence mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. GI tract, respiratory tract, urogenital tract. You run into MALT, all of those locations, because you really, really need for the immune system to know whether you get exposed to something in all of those mucous membranes. You call MALT in the small intestine a Peyer's patch. Probably won't ask you that. You call it a lymph nodule when it's in your bronchi. And there's a whole bunch of MALT all over the place. Okay, so what is a tonsil? Tonsil is big, lumpy MALT. This is what it is. And tonsils are specifically associated with your naso and oropharynx. That's where those are. And you've met these before. You just didn't talk about what they did in anatomy lab. Notice that this is a tonsil. And of course, it has collections of these lymphatic nodules. The only difference between a tonsil and MALT is that a tonsil is bigger, lumpier, and it has a little more connective tissue associated with it. So it's a massive lymphoid tissue that's found in the mucous membranes of your throat. Really, these are going, and your nose too, these are really going to guard against germs that come in the nose and the mouth. So tonsils that you have, the ones that are at the back of your nasopharynx are called your pharyngeal tonsils, or when they get swollen, they're called adenoids. And sometimes people have their adenoids removed when they swell up so much that they cause problems with respiration. Your palatine tonsils are these that you see at the back of the soft palate. These are the ones that are usually removed when someone has a tonsillectomy. And then your lingual tonsils, I don't know that those are removed very often at all. Those are at the base of the tongue. So pharyngeal, back of the nasopharynx, palatine, sort of back of the oropharynx, and then the lingual at the bottom of the tongue. And those are all basically composed of lymphatic nodules plus a bunch of connective tissue. And they're part of the immune system. And then your appendix. Your appendix is also called the vermiform, which means worm-like appendix. That projects off of the cecum of the large intestine, and you've seen what it looks like before, right? It's actually more part of the lymphatic or immune system than it is part of the digestive system. And it doesn't seem to be particularly necessary in humans. It does have a lot of immune function in other organisms, but we've got so much redundancy in the immune system that a lot of times the appendix is not needed. I don't have mine. So you don't have to remove your appendix just because you don't know what we do. But if you don't, I will kill you if the urge strikes me. But it might help your immune system, maybe. So the appendix is a little bit of, it's not that much of a mystery. It's just probably an evolutionary throwback, not completely necessary. And because of its anatomy, sometimes it actually catches toxins and pathogens and has to be removed. So it's an interesting thing to figure out whether that's going to stay around for 10,000 more years. Okay, so I will stop there and we'll do lymph nodes in the next one.